You can listen again to any shows at bcfmradio.com and leave comments about your favourite programmes. BCfm 93.2, your interactive station, 24 hours a day.
Now, women in Iran, could you go on holiday there not knowing about the rules about wearing headscarves or hijabs? Soraya Sepahpour-Ulrich was born in Tehran, brought up in Godalming in Surrey. She now lives over in California, but she always looks forward to revisiting her homeland, which is Iran, believing many Western women are missing out to a wonderful Persian culture. And I spoke to her a couple of weeks ago when I was over in Tehran about this whole business of women and why they might think it might not be a good idea to go to Iran, and why she thinks it's a great idea to.
My name is Soraya Sepahpour-Ulrich, and I'm here in Tehran to attend a international conference on 17,000 Iranian victims of terror. If you think about the events of 9/11, 3,000 people died in that, and America basically went to war with the whole world, just about, under the pretext of fighting terrorism. And here we have 17,000 people who've perished, and nobody even acknowledges the fact. So it's pretty shocking, and I think we need to expand on this and make it known to the rest of the world.
Now, you've got an interesting life. You've got a foot in both camps, in Iran and in the United States. How do you get treated in America?
I'm actually a public diplomacy scholar, so my education was offered by the State Department itself. But because I became so aware of what was going on, and because I've started researching U.S. foreign policy and speaking out against it, I'm not all too popular in America. In fact, I can tell you that the FBI comes to my door, and every time I go to the airport, I land in LAX or even elsewhere, Chicago, they pull me aside and they try to intimidate me. I mean, they said this is a secondary inspection. They sit me in a room all on my own, no telephone or anything, for half an hour until they decide I can go with no questions asked. So it's ludicrous. I think they would like to shut me up or intimidate me because I do speak very vocally. I appear on as many interviews as possible to build awareness about what U.S. plans are around the world. And I do criticize Israel a great deal. Those things don't bode well for anybody living in America.
What's your thoughts about the recent rapprochement between Obama and Rouhani and the signing of the nuclear peace accords?
Well, I think Iran is exercising diplomacy here. But as far as America goes, I don't believe for a moment that America went to bed one night and got up the next day and decided that we want Iran as a friend or an ally or even have normal relations. If America were thinking that way, which they did during the Eisenhower period and the Soviet Union, if they accepted a peaceful coexistence with Iran, it would really mean to America that Iran won the battle without fighting the war. In other words, it was able to establish itself as a sovereign nation and eject a superpower. And America has accepted that notion. And, for that reason alone, America is not likely to just sign a deal with Iran and start things on a good footing and become friends. And I seriously believe that America has tried everything possible. It aided Iraq in the 8-year war. It tried the Noger coup in 1980. It's tried assassinations, sanctions, and what have you. And I think this is probably a new page for the United States to try and undermine the government in Iran, the system of government in Iran.
How can they undermine by signing a peace deal?
Well, it would probably throw Iran off guard, or at least that's what they're hoping. And so they will be less on guard when it comes to foreign infiltration and undermining the culture and everything else in Iran. And also the other fear I have, and it's really not a fear, it's a reality. I mean, even as we speak, the United States Pentagon has drawn up military plans. I mean, you don't sign a peace deal and then try and turn around and say, well, this peace deal, because we will have people on the ground, will make it that much easier to bomb Iran, which is mind-boggling in itself. And another very baseless accusation. I mean, altogether, the world has accepted that even if Iran were to build a nuclear bomb, which it has no intentions of doing, it is not in a position to launch this bomb offensively. So the idea of a nuclear bomb in itself has become fairly benign. There's been lots of literature in that on that in America. What has the people worried and concerned around the globe, especially because of ISIL, is terrorism. And America continues to make false accusations that Iran is a former state sponsor of terrorism. And even Resolution 1337, passed post 9/11, basically gave the United States a carte blanche to invade any country based on fighting terror. And that has always concerned me, because when that resolution was passed, terrorism was never defined. So America can sign a peace deal today if it so wishes. Tomorrow, it could say that Iran is sponsoring terrorists, is helping this group and that and the other, and carry out operations that way. Or before, the whole reason Iran's dossier is at the UN Security Council in the first place, the nuclear dossier, is because the terrorist group got information from Israel and provided it to the IAEA. IAEA was not able to prove it, but it was not in a position to deny it, because how do you prove a negative? And so this is why Iran is in this place having negotiations in the first place, based on lies and misinformation. So what's to stop them from this happening again? I mean, America has the ability to have snapback sanctions and what have you. And, I just have to add that if America did have good intentions, if this were a real peace treaty, first of all, it would stop the demonization of Iran. And secondly, whilst they have this peace agreement, America had this bilateral treaty with Iran, the Algiers Accord, which was signed in 1981, in which the United States undertook never to interfere in Iranian affairs, militarily or otherwise. And it has been violating that ever since. It's violating it now, as the negotiations were going on and thereafter. So to trust America would be absurd. And I hope and I'm confident Iranian officials are not naive enough to trust America. But I also hope that the people don't let down their guards and they're on the lookout for what may come next from there. I don't think it bodes well.
How does Israel fit into all this then?
Well, Israel conducts U.S. foreign policy. I mean, the most prominent scholars have said that Israeli, like Mearsheimer and Walt, they've said that Israel shapes U.S. foreign policy. You only have to look at the Israeli lobby groups, AIPAC being the most powerful, but then AIPAC is the muscle. It doesn't formulate ideas. It's all the pro-Israeli think tanks in the United States that come up with these policy papers, and then they're implemented by whichever administration happens to be in office. And AIPAC is the muscle, and, says, you have to do this, and we'll buy you or we don't buy you. But also another thing that's very frightening, I think, about the United States, and very few people even give it a second thought, is all the security in the United States is run by Israeli governments, including FBI, including water treatment plants, including the nuclear sites, including the airports. And the danger of having Israeli firms in charge of all these securities is just beyond anybody's imagination. So even if AIPAC were to pull back and say, okay, I'm a foreign agent, I won't interfere, there is still this problem with the security of the United States being in the hands of Israeli firms. And so Israel's power over America is not just in the fact that they can buy politicians. It's a lot more complex than that, and a lot more threatening to the country.
You've got a presidential election coming up. Have you like to look in your crystal ball and see which interesting characters might take over from Obama?
Well, Mr. Trump seems to be the forerunner, and it's very interesting because many people that are perhaps more intellectual think of him as a clown. But the sad reality is he's a reflection of the American people. I mean, the American people want somebody who's a showman. They don't want a politician. They're done with politics, and quite frankly, they don't even grasp politics. So the very fact that they have a showman up there making them excited doesn't bode well for America's future. It speaks volumes about the American people. But the one thing I do like about Mr. Trump is the fact that he's revealed how much politics are bought. I mean, in the first presidential debate, he told everybody on stage basically that he'd paid for something or other for them and he could ask for favors. And this is how America is run. Anybody who calls America a democracy is very naive. I mean, I tend to say it, and forgive me saying so on air, but I think America is a brothel. There are pimps who buy their presidents and the political elite, and the rest are little workers cleaning the brothel. It is not a democracy.
How about Iran, though? Give us a sort of an insider's view of how politics does or doesn't work here, because it's got this interesting element of the kind of clerical side of things.
I think that, before the Islamic Revolution, I mean, when the Shah's father came, former Shah's father took power, he basically ordered every devout Muslim to unveil themselves, to remove the hijab, and to become westernized. And, at that time, I hear that a lot of people were even too embarrassed to go out because they didn't want to go out without their head covering and whatever. So at that time, religion was taken away from the people, and a lot of people believed in it.
A similar thing happened, of course, in Turkey, didn't it,
Right.
previously?
Right, exactly. And a lot of people are reaching back for that, what used to be theirs. But speaking of the hijab, during the Shah's period, talking about women, during the Shah's period, when the women wore the hijab, the chadors or the scarves, very few were from better families. Mostly it was a reflection of a societal standing of people. And women who wore the hijab didn't have a chance to go to school, they didn't progress, they were born in it and they died in it. There was a caste system, in my opinion. I mean, you were born in that social class and you stayed there. And all the pro-women's rights, progressive Western countries never criticized that at all. And when the Islamic Revolution took place, and a revolution, as you would know, is, the turnaround, the changeover of society, the hijab was reimposed on women. Although this time around it didn't become an impediment, it helped them progress. Actually, they could go to schools, they could have jobs, they could go to universities, all free. So in a manner of speaking, the Islamic Revolution, the clerical regime, helped women progress tremendously in education, in everything else, and social welfare. And a lot of times it's the minority that makes a lot of noise. A minority of the Iranian people are very pro-Western, and their idea of modernity or progress is dressing like a Western person. Even, I went to a wedding a couple of days ago, and the invitation card was in English, which to me was, ridiculous. So they think in order to be accepted by the world at large, they have to dress a certain way, speak a certain way, like a certain way, and have their dislikes a certain way. So they're really very opposed to the clerical regime. And yes, there is a certain degree of, I won't say there's free speech here or politics is hunky-dory and everybody can say whatever they like. There are limitations. It's certainly a lot more free than it used to be. But I sincerely believe there are restrictions because so many are trying to undermine the system from without. If Iran were left alone and allowed to find its own way forward, you would not see any of these restrictions at all. It's just that there are too many outsiders trying to take over the country, either by putting a Washington-friendly alternative in place or neocolonialism or what have you. So I think those are the reasons for the restrictions, because I've spoken to some of the very high-ranking clergy, and they're very open-minded. They're really quite progressive. So I think they feel they need to protect the system and to some degree the people and themselves, of course. I mean, they're as ambitious as any other politician. So I think these are the reasons for the restrictions. But I think, hopefully, left alone, they would make progress.
A lot of Western women would say, well, I wouldn't want to go to Iran because of the way women are treated there, this kind of separate, for example, even things like bathing.
Yeah. Well, anything that's new might be frightening to some, but I mean, if I think as a Westerner they should be more adventurous and see what it would be like to go somewhere different. What's the point of going to Cap d'Antibes where they're all topless? Go somewhere where things are different, learn about different cultures. And women are not treated poorly here. I always say to my husband, gosh, who's an American? I love the way my sister is treated by her Iranian husband. She's a little princess. And he always says, well, what is it that I don't do for you? I think the way women are treated on a personal level depends on the upbringing of the individual. Having said that, laws in Iran don't favor women when it comes to divorce and inheritance. But if you go to a lot of the offices here in Iran, administrative buildings, what have you, see a lot more women than men these days. And my God, they're bossy. I mean, you think American women are bossy, Iranian women are a lot worse. I remember the first time I came to Iran after some 10 years. I was dressed, when my sister picked me up from the airport, she was horrified. She was humiliated. She said, my God, why do you look like this? Do you look terrible? And she was all fashionable and trendy and pretty. And I thought I had to look awful and drab. And really in Iran, I mean, yes, out on the streets, women have to be modest. You know, they dress pretty much like you put a scarf over your head and something that does not quite emphasize your curves. But, you know, at home and in parties, they dress up far better than we do in America. I know Europeans are more fashion savvy, but Americans certainly are not. And women here, they've always been ahead of fashion. They're very conscious of being fashionable and pretty. And they all have, well, a certain class of Iranians, again, I can't say all, because, the mentality changes with how devout you are and how pious you are. But say my family, they all have their bikinis, they bathe, they swim. In houses with their private pools, yes, men and women do swim together. But if they were to go to, say, the sea, the Caspian Sea, it would be a section there, but it doesn't mean that you have to swim with a chador in the sea. You go like you would in a bathing suit. So it's nothing very bizarre about it. It's just that they think that naked commingling with men is a huge temptation, which I'm sure it is, but perhaps they think people can't control it here. I don't know, but that's all it is. It's really, honestly, it's really not that. Every person who's come to Iran has been delighted. And honestly, if you want to spend the money to go somewhere, why not go somewhere where you can learn something, when you can see something different? I mean, if you want to look at a reflection of yourself and your own culture, stand in front of the mirror and pocket the money.
Some good travel tips there anyway, certainly on the financial side from Soraya Sepahpour-Ulrich, who I spoke to in Tehran. But Martin, she's making some quite important points about foreign policy there, because she's essentially saying that after 9/11 the US took on the entire world in a war where they can go into any country they want.
Well, they did, and they even tried to point the finger at the Iranians for the 9/11 attack, even though ostensibly it was carried out by Saudis, and of course in reality it's probably carried out by elements within the Western and
I thought it was
intelligence
carried out by somebody in a cave in Afghanistan.
Well, indeed, but I mean, at the same time, they basically, various politicians in the US tried to put Iran into the frame. They tried to suggest that Saddam Hussein had met with Al-Qaeda operatives, etc. People have got to realise that this history of Western intelligence services using particularly Sunni terrorism goes back a long way. It goes back to Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, and they're still doing it. It's not something that's gone away. Inside Syria, they are still working with those groups.
And I'll put a link up on our show page, www.thisweek.org.uk, to Soraya's columns, because almost every time she writes something, actually I was looking through something else this week to get this insight which completely crosses the US-Iranian boundaries.